We had been here like 6 weeks probably when the story takes place. So it's a Saturday afternoon, later on in July. And the way that we were running the practice, both vets would work in the morning until noon, and then at noon one would take the rest of the weekend. And it happened to be my weekend to work, so I got home at noon all dirty and sweaty and so forth like usual, and take a nice shower and get nice relaxing clothes on and kind of settle in for hopefully a pretty easy weekend with not many calls. So it started out really nicely. It was a beautiful afternoon. 4 o'clock, the phone rang, and we hadn't had time to make many friends yet, so I assumed that would be a call from a farmer. So I answered the phone like I always did, Dr. Gray speaking, and a farmer answered. And the guy said, well, are you the new vet here? And I answered, yes, I'm working at the Spring Grove Vet Clinic, can I help you? I'm on call this weekend. And he said, well, I'm Harris Conroot, and you don't know me, but I live about 9 miles south of town, and I'd like to have you come out and check a cow yet today. I said, oh, okay, I can do that. What seems to be the problem? And he said, well, she's got a really bad hind foot. And then I thought I should probably be able to get out of this. So I said, well, we usually just do emergencies, this time of the day on Saturday and Sunday. And could I do it first thing Monday morning? And he said, oh man, it's really swollen, it's really hurting her. It's been going on for over a week, and I can't leave it till Monday, and which is kind of left-handed thinking, but I've heard it since, and so I said, well, if you think it really needs to be done, I certainly could come out and do it. You tell me the directions, and I'll come down and take care of it. So he gave me the directions, and really thanked me, and put my coveralls on, got in the car, and drove down there. And I said it was a beautiful day, and of course you all know the trip down southern route of Norwegian Ridge, and then down towards the Wilder Ridge Cemetery through the valley with the trout stream. It's beautiful. It's just great. It's one of those times when and oftentimes it's happened to me that you think, I can't believe I get paid for doing this, because it's just nice. So I got down about 9 miles south, and just down the valley before you go up the hill to the Iowa River Cemetery was this little metal mailbox with somebody took a black paintbrush and scribbled Conroot on it. You could barely tell, but it was Conroot. So I knew that was the driveway. So I pulled in this little driveway with trees, just a canopy, just beautiful, and barely a driveway. You could tell it wasn't driven on all that much. Down about an eighth of a mile, and then you go up the hill, and then sure enough, here's a clearing, and you drive into the clearing, and there's a field there. And off to the right is this little farmhouse, just quite a small little frame house, begging for paint of any color. And then the interesting thing was, there's no garage, no car, and the lawn obviously had been mowed probably twice with the hay mower for the field. And so obviously when he got through mowing hay, then he'd take a swipe around the lawn with his hay mower, and if there was enough grass there, he'd probably make hay on it too. But anyway, and then a little path coming out of the house, and then the other thing that was kind of interesting, there was a C farm mall standing out pretty close to the door, and I knew without a doubt that this was a Norwegian bachelor farmer, because there wasn't an ounce of femininity in any of that. It just had to be. And it seemed like the ones I've known since, they seemed like these little C farm malls for getting around with. But anyway, I knew it was bachelor. And then this little dirt trail leads up across the yard out to the barn. A nice little red frame barn. It was obviously, it had much more love given to it than the house. And the door was shut, and I just pulled up to it and got my things out for doing a hoof and the rope and the beam hook. I went in the barn, and it's really interesting. Obviously, he was done milking. the surge milkers were hanging on the wall, these little kind of a milk house in there, and the cows had, the feed was down for the next morning. Really impressed. You know, the guy would get up early enough in the morning that he would be milking at this time of the day, but it was all done, and the cow I needed was in there all alone, and sure enough, she had this terrible looking foot, so I went ahead, put the beam hook up, and hoisted the hoof up and went to work on it, and luckily I pared it down and hit a nice big abscess, and this pus flew out, which sounds kind of gross, but it just gives you a relief when it happens. You know you found the spot, you know you're going to be able to fix it. You remove the bottom of the hoof and put it medicated, and that's going to work, so you feel really good. So I went ahead and was getting ready to wrap it, and then I heard the barn door open and close, and looked up and got my first look at Harris Conroot, and he was about 40, 45, and just had a bath. You could tell he was just, his hair was wet, all slicked back, and fresh shaved, and it's the look, people who only use a safety razor and shave once or twice a week, their skin's really nice and shiny when they get it. You can just tell that he had done a shave and hadn't done one real recently. And he had on a pair of nice, clean Oshkosh B'gosh overalls, and he just looked pretty good. And so he came over and introduced himself, and I showed him this foot. And the interesting thing, when he got over close to me, all of a sudden it smelled really good in the barn, and that was his aftershave. He evidently just dumped it on because he I don't know if he felt he might have covered up something or what, but he smelled really nice. So anyway, I showed him the foot, showed him how I was going to fix it, and went ahead and wrapped it, and was just making small talk, and I was letting the hoof down, and Harris said, "Is this your last call for today?" And for some reason, for 46 years now, when you go in and call, the farmers are really interested in where your next call is, or if you have another one. And so I didn't think anything about that. I said, "Yeah, I think so. Hopefully it is." And he said, "Will you be going back to Spring Grove now then?" And we hadn't been here very long, so we still like the bends at the end of the sentences. So that was pretty funny. But I said, "Yeah, I'm sure I'll be going back to Spring Grove." Okay, and I got my things out, going out the door of the truck, and he said, "Say, be okay if I ride back to town with you?" And all of a sudden it struck me that I was part of this scheme to get Harris Conroot to town on Saturday night. And it really hadn't occurred to me before I did this, what was going on. So I kind of laughed and said, "Oh, sure, you ride back with me." And, "Oh, good." And so he didn't have to go back to the house. He had his billfold, he's ready to go, so he jumped in with me. And we drove back to the 9 miles to Spring Grove, and I got to know Harris, and we had he was a good talker, and we were pretty good friends by the time we got back to town. And as I drove up the county road up to Highway 44, in the middle of town there, I said, "Hey, Harris, where can I take you? Where do you want out?" And he said, "Oh, right here would be good." And I was right next to the liquor store on the right. Jimmy Rambo's bar and restaurant was next to that. There was a tavern right straight ahead of us, and then the Legion Club room. And I thought, well, of course, that's perfect. He's like he's in heaven. So he got out and thanked me profusely, and that was it for that evening. Next morning, I had a call after church going west out of town, and as I came by the Ballard House here, they had a bench where people sat, and there sat Harris, and same clothes on, and waved at me, and I went on by, and I was thinking, I wonder if when I come back from this call, if Harris is going to be there hailing me down to get it right back home again. But when I came back, he was gone, so he evidently had gotten me right back home again. And I found out later that in this hotel, guys like him who came to town on Saturday night for a couple bucks, they could get a room if they drank too much or didn't have a way home or whatever. They could stay over and get breakfast in the restaurant in the morning, and it was just a pretty good deal. So that's how I met Harris, and like I say, he got to be a good friend. And we had a lot of work down by the River Cemetery, and every now and then you'd be driving on one of those roads and there was a guy walking. It would be Harris, and I'd always pull over and, where are you going? And jump in and give him a ride somewhere. And he farmed there for quite a few years. Just a really nice, that was my first experience with Norwegian Bastard Farm. It was a good experience.
Now my grandpa liked blackberry pie. There were a lot of foods he didn't like. He wouldn't eat things like lettuce. He said, that's for cows. The only thing green he'd eat was peas, and he ate them with a knife. We kids would watch to see if some of the peas dropped. But it was meat, potatoes, and gravy, and rutabagas. He loved rutabagas because he raised the best rutabagas in the county, because you have to have just the right kind of soil for rutabagas. And he knew that down by the river was the sweetest soil. But once a year he wanted blackberry pie, and the blackberries were ripe. So he wanted to know if I'd like to come along. I was about here. He said, you better get ready. I said, get ready? I had shoes on. Red wing shoes. We lived up where red wing shoes were made. I always had red wing shoes. Well, I watched Grandpa get ready. Now, my grandpa had, and a lot of other men in the neighborhood, had 2 sets of underwear. Winter underwear, which had long sleeves and long legs, and summer underwear, which had short sleeves and long legs. The summer underwear were cotton and the winter underwear were wool. Now that's what I thought. Well, he had Grandma go get his winter underwear. And then he put on a long sleeve shirt and he had Grandma tie the shirt with some shoelace. Now what's he doing? And then he put a big red handkerchief around his neck and his hat down low, and he says, let's go. And he had a bucket and I had a bucket, tin buckets. He used to sell honey in those buckets. He headed over to the woods. On the edge of the woods were these blackberry bushes. And when we got there, he started to go fast. He said, we got to do this fast. So I got down low, and he was up above, and he was picking so fast that the berries were dropping on my straw hat, and I'd pick them off. See? And pretty soon I heard my grandpa come pretty close to cussing. After all, he was a Sunday school superintendent. He couldn't do that. But, concerted bugs! Confounded mosquitoes! Get off of me! It was the mosquitoes and the flies that were after him, and of course, the more he sweat, the more they came. The mosquito or fly smells sweat, that's like an invitation. Says, come on, pretty good eating over here. Well, after about 20 minutes, Grandpa said, we're done! And he just took off. About 20 feet he stopped, and I picked up berries on the ground. He had fallen and kept on a little while, and we walked sort of slowly home, and the breeze cooled us on. Grandma made 2 blackberry pies. We didn't get them till supper time, but he put his handkerchief around his chin so that he could drip the blackberry pie juice in there. He said, there's nothing better than blackberry pies.
Over 100 years ago, there was a family that moved to western Wisconsin, Pine Forest there, and they farmed a little farm, and they had several children. And the story really takes place about 3 of the children. Tom, and then 3 years younger was Caddy, and 2 years younger was Warren, the Woodlawn family. And they were living in this little farm there. They had a great time. And Caddy, you know, her mother wanted Caddy to be a young lady, and Caddy loved to run with her brothers. She just was just great. She had long, flaming red hair and freckles, and she didn't ever wear shoes until it really got cold. She loved to run with her brothers because they loved to run around barefoot too. Well, it was getting to be later in the fall. The leaves had pretty much fallen, and it was time to think about the school term. Now, her school in Dunville only meant 2 terms a year, whereas the teachers in Durand, they were there the whole year with their school year, but they couldn't afford a teacher that many times, so they had 2 terms, and Miss Parker would come out from Durand, and she would have class. Now, this country school had all 8 grades, and there was quite a mixture of boys and girls that came from the area to that little school. Well, before they could go to school that term, Mother Woodlawn decided that they needed some new clothes. So she invited a neighbor lady, Mrs. Kalin, to come over and try on and get some clothing ready for Tom and Warren and Ken. And so while they were getting fit, Tom kind of took a shine to this little Katie, the lady's daughter, and she had beautiful blonde hair and blue eyes, and Tom would never admit that he liked her, but he just kind of took a fancy to her. So here he was standing on a chair, and Katie's mother was measuring him, and he got all red, and Katie was looking at it, and then he'd look at her, and then she'd look down, was all embarrassed, Anyway, they got their clothing all sized up, and she got it ready for them. It got colder and colder, and the first day of school, when they had to walk that 1.5 miles to the schoolhouse, it had snowed in the night, and they had all this snow, and said, oh, maybe we don't have to. Well, they didn't think about that in those days. They had school, and they could hear the teacher, Mrs. Parker, ringing that bell, and there were kids coming from all the different areas, and so they got up to the schoolhouse, and there she was, and out of the corner of their eye, they saw those 2 bully brothers, Asher and Obadiah Jones. Oh no, we're going to have to put up with them again? Well, they went in, Miss Parker welcomed, they walked into school, and they had a nice fire. Oh, it was nice and warm in there. It had been cold, all the way that walked to school. So they got in there and sat down, and pretty soon in tromped Asher and Obadiah. Obadiah, he went over to a desk, plugged down in the desk, with that kind of an attitude, had his coonskin hat on, and he wasn't allowed to take it off. No way. He just sat. And then he begins to put his feet up on Maggie Bunn's desk. Well, she said, get your feet off of my desk, Obadiah. Who's going to make me? Nobody dared do it last year, and they're not going to do it again this year. Ooh, little silence in the school. Wondered what's going to happen. Well, he just kept his feet up there, and poor Maggie, she was kind of frightened, And Caddy, she was brave, That red hair just gave her a temper to her. Her temper got the best of her. Obadiah, get your feet off of her desk. That's not right. And it says, who's going to make me? Well, she'd had enough. He said, nobody told me what to do last year, and nobody's going to tell me to do what to do this year. So she got so mad, her temper just really boiled up, and she went over with the ruler, and she hit him a good one on his knees. Oh, just kind of took him back. Well, then he got up and he went after Caddy. Well, they started scrapping a little bit, and now Miss Parker was still out there ringing the bell for the other boys and girls to come, So, but all of a sudden, she looked around, and here Tom and Warren had joined the fight, and then here Asher, the brother, comes over, and they're all in the big hullabaloo over here fighting. And then Miss Parker sees this fight, and she said, "What is going on here? Sit down." Well, some of them did. But she said, "What's going on here?" And then Maggie Bunn said, "Miss Parker, Obadiah put his feet on my desk and he wouldn't put him down. And he said nobody was going to make him do that." And then Caddy interrupted and she said, "Yes, and I told him to put his feet down, and he said nobody could tell him what to do. So I went over and I hit him with my ruler, and then he got mad at me." Well, Obadiah said, "I can do whatever I want. I did last year, and I'm going to do the same this year." Well, that really got Miss Parker, who was rather timid, but she's had enough. She walked over, and he kind of bent over a little bit, and she grabbed him right by his hair. And she held on tight, and she marched him to the front of the room. And she says, Obadiah, you can make a decision. You either calm down and behave yourself, or you go out that door and I don't want to see you the rest of the term. Or you can decide. And if you go out that door, I want you to go to the woodshed and you want you to get me some wood. And you decide. And in 5 minutes, you either go home or you come back in here with some wood. And she said to the class, now the rest of you work on your multiplication tables. We're going to start school now. So they were doing that and they were working along. All of a sudden they heard this creaky door slowly open. In comes Obadiah. And he's rather a meek soul, not like the Obadiah that they knew before. And he grabbed his hat, held it in his hand, and in the other hand he had some wood. And he walked up to the front of the room and he sat down in his desk. And that's how the school term ended. He was going to behave. And Miss Parker ruled.
Now, there are two kinds of stories. Stories that really happened and stories that didn't. And you have to tell them the same. You have to really see it so that the other people can see the story too. The storytelling is about making pictures happen in your brain. You want to try to tell a story?
I was about your age. My dad bought a Shetland pony for my brother and I. Edward, who's a year older than I am. I probably was a little bit younger. I was probably about 5 or 6. And he bought it from an implement dealer in Spring Grove named Melvin Thorson. He sold Minneapolis Marine tractors. You know what a Minneapolis Marine tractor is? I've never heard of it before. So he had a shop just above the old post office. There was an old building down there, but he had a pony, and he delivered this pony to us out at the farm 2 miles east of Spring Grove, where I grew up. And I couldn't wait to get on that pony. I thought, this is really going to be great. And if you know anything about ponies, they can be very stubborn, and they have kind of one-track mind a lot of times. So I got on that pony, and all he could think about was going home where he came from. And not having ever ridden a pony before, he took off at a full gallop, and we had gone 50 yards down the field, and I fell off. And somehow my dad caught the pony and brought him back and asked if I wanted to ride him again. And I said, no way. I said, I had enough of that pony for the time being, but that pony became very dear to my brother and I. We rode it, and when our cousins came from the cities, we had a pony cart for it. We'd give them rides, and back in the 40s, not many people had movie cameras, but there was a couple that stopped by driving Highway 44 one day, and they stopped by and they wanted to take videos of us, an old 8mm camera. So somewhere in this world, there's an old video of me and my brothers and cousins riding in a pony cart when we were like 5, 6, 10 years old. And then another story my grandchildren like to listen to is one winter we had about a foot of nice snow, and then we had a warm spell, and then it started raining. And then it got really cold, and so the snow was very crusty. You could walk on top of the snow. And you know what a runner sled is? You know what you've seen runner sleds. Well, anyway, the snow was so hard that the runner sled would glide on top of the snow. And I was going down this hill south of my dad's barn down into the woods. I must have been doing 25 miles an hour. And I got to the bottom of the hill as I started pulling out the G-forces, which I learned about later in life. Took over, and the runner sled dug into the snow, and it came to a full stop, like right now, but I had momentum, and I went sliding off that runner's sled, and my face was right on that crusty snow. You know what couldn't feel my lips. I thought I'd ripped my lips off. I was just panicky. I left the runner sled, I ran all the way up the hill, went come tearing into the kitchen, my mother was in there. Right inside the door to the left, we had a mirror hanging. Around the corner I went, and I looked in the mirror to see if I still had my lips. I told that to Christina Siri the other night, they just giggled. They thought that was so funny. But it was pretty serious at the time. So, I tell shorter stories, and a story I thought about when Jim was telling a story. My dad grew up in the house where your grandparents lived. In fact, he was the last person to be moved into that house from the old house, because if you look up above the front porch, it says 1903. My dad was born in 1902, so he was a baby when that house was built. And so the last thing they did when they moved everything in was to get my father. But my father told me that when he was about Ben's age, that they had a billy goat. He liked to tease that billy goat. You know where the stone barn is down there by the vet clinic? He used to stand up against the stone barn, and he'd tease this goat, and the goat would come charging him, and then he'd step out of the side, and the billy goat would hit that stone wall and back up, and he'd back up and I'll come again. And so my dad thought he would play a trick on this billy goat, because it didn't seem to face him. So one time he straddled a long pole of a wagon, you know, the reach pole for the horses, where you hang the, what do you call those things? I forgot.
The harness of the
Yeah.
collars.
Well, he stood and straddled this pole, and he got this billy goat all lined up. And where that billy goat charged him, and just as the billy goat, he lifted up the reach pole, and the billy goat hit that reach pole just head on and moved the wagon back about 5 feet. And the billy goat had enough, he staggered off. Didn't have anything else to do with it. So that's just a few of the stories that I tell my grandchildren.
My wife and I grew up here, as most of you know her. My wife came when she was 14, and I grew up here. Went to college, and after college we got married right away. Of course, nobody had any money whatsoever, but we discovered the boundary waters of Minnesota, which is a big canoe area. And a friend of mine and I, for $50 or $75, bought one canoe. And we went up there, and then we decided that was really the place we loved. So then Diane came, and Ron and Jean Bogley would come, and so we'd leave Friday. We'd work all day Friday, and then, or Thursday, and maybe take a day off. But the days were pretty precious, so we didn't waste many days because we didn't have much vacation. We'd drive all night, get up there first thing in the morning into this beautiful country, towering pines, loons, even some eagles then. Now there's a lot more eagles today, but we'd go to this place, load our canoe onto the water, load it up with our provisions for about 3 days, and we'd go and we'd paddle across Seagull Lake into Alpine Lake, and we had a special campsite that we really liked. We'd go in there, we'd set all up, get the wood, you know, do all of that sort of thing, and then later in the day, we'd go out fishing. We'd fish during the day, but we didn't have any, you know, minnows or worms or anything like that. We just had jigs that we made, and a jig is a piece of lead about this big, and we painted it kind of fluorescent red-orange, and then you tied just feathers, kind of well, it's deer hair, and that was yellow. And we had discovered that those were really good for catching walleyes. And you know what walleyes are like. Their eyes just, you know, almost reflect on you, and of course anybody who's ever been in Minnesota knew that the first thing you try to catch is walleyes. So later in the day, we'd go down canoe about a mile into what was where the water came in from Jasper Lake into Alpine Lake, and the fish would circle around, and we'd catch them on these jigs by just pulling it very slow on the ground. We're not sure what they thought it was, but they would take it and you'd feel it. You'd be pulling along, and all of a sudden you didn't feel anything, and then you knew a fish had it and set them up. And the thing was to start around this island, work around, and then go way up in the rapids and anchor, because that's where they went in the very end of the day. And you may only been in a couple of feet of water, so you'd anchor your canoe. It was, a little bit tippy because it was a canoe, and you'd fish into dark. And the exciting thing about all this, one was you caught a lot of fish, and we took probably more than we were supposed to. But when after it was dark, because they quit coming up into the rapids after dark, then you'd canoe back. And the exciting thing of this trip is you're canoeing back in the dark without any lights, and the stars in the sky is just brilliant. And you can actually canoe along, and you watch the sky. You probably couldn't see where you're going, but you watch the sky, and you can see the shadow of the trees. You'd see the edges of the trees because there were a lot of islands. And you'd learn how to canoe back by just looking at the sky. And of course, occasionally you'd see shooting stars. And of course, then you'd see the Milky Way, and you'd see all that. And it was just spectacular. We'd get back, build a big fire, put our fish in a fish trap, make dinner, set up some lanterns and that, and then you're really tired after a long day of fishing. And the thing that was the truth, though, we were from here. We didn't know about this country. And you think about Indians, and you think about, there were nothing wrong with Indians, but you just wondered what was out there. You knew there were bears out there, and so you did have all of those thoughts as you were laying in that little tent, which really wasn't much to protect you. But after being in the water all day, and getting in that sleeping bag, we went to sleep just like that. That's the story.
I'm going to tell you a Christmas story that I tell to my grandchildren. Okay? I put 2 kids in it. And it's the children's, it's the way the children would experience the Christmas time. There were these shepherds near this town called Bethlehem. And they had to stay out all night, or at least some of them did. Now, shepherds bring the sheep in for the night. They have 2 pens, one for goats and one for sheep. The goats are too hard on the sheep. They have them separate, and they have these stone walls. But they have to have somebody staying awake all night in case hyenas or jackals, or in ancient times even lions, would come and try to eat the sheep. So the shepherds decided to go out there. This is a long ways away in the land that's called Israel or Palestine, depending on who you are. And there was an old blind man. And he had been a shepherd, and he said, I would like to go along. Well, you're blind. How are you going to make it? He said, well, I've got a granddaughter and a grandson. They'll each hold one hand, and I'll make it up real fine. So his grandson and his granddaughter, they went out to the hilltop where they had the sheep coming into the farm. And after the sheep were all in, they had a little fire going. And somebody came running. A messenger came running and said, hey, fellas! Over there in the town in a little barn, a baby was just born. You gotta go see this baby, it was just born. Now maybe you didn't know this, but the word angel is the word messenger. It's the Greek word for messenger. Well, the shepherd said, that would be nice, but who's going to take care of the sheep? Who's going to watch out for the animals? The bad animals. The old man said, well, my grandson and my granddaughter can do that. I'm good at hearing things coming, and they're good at throwing stones. So they sat there. All of a sudden, the man said, can you hear it? Wow. The stars are singing. Yeah, the stars are singing. He said, listen. They seem to be singing. He said, do you know what they're saying? They're saying, Shalom, Shalom, Shalom. Kavod B'Elohim. Glory in the highest, and peace on earth. shepherds came back and they had seen the baby. But the old man and the old girl, they had heard the stars. And if you go out at night, the stars are still singing that song.
Stories tonight, but the one with the washing machine and the old times just made me think of a good story, and it's a true story. And it happened in Norway. And many of you know I have a friend, Roar, in Norway. And you know Roar has a lot of energy. But he lives on an island, and in the winter, when it's very cold, he lives there alone with his cat. The only way to communicate with people is either to take his boat and go at least 20 minutes to the mainland, or to talk on the telephone. And I'll tell you, Ruar's a talker. And when he's on the telephone, he goes on and on. Well, I've been there sometimes in the summer, and he speaks with Norwegian, and he speaks very fast, forthright. And I don't understand Norse very well, so I ignore it quite a bit. However, if you want his attention, the house had better be burning down when he's on the telephone. Because his ability to be one-on-one with somebody, even on the telephone, is very sincerely interested. It's great. Most of the time. Except this one night. Well, Ruar has this old husmansplatz. And this husmansplatz only has things that he has been able to borrow, to buy very cheap, or to take apart from somewhere else and bring it to this island. Including this safe. But that's a different story. But one time, his washing machine and his dryer didn't work. Well, actually, it's not in the same sense we think of a washing machine and dryer. Because in this day, it could have been 50 years ago, because the washing machine was this big round one, cylinder, and you took the hose from the wall and you filled it with water, cold water. Only cold water, because the water came down from a big receptacle or reservoir up on top of the mountain. And then you turn the water on to the temperature you want. And in Norway, everybody knows exactly the temperature every type of clothing is washed in. Does anyone here know what temperature you wash cotton or wool in? They do in Norway, even today. But this washing machine must be 40, 50 years old. It's a good washing machine. It's an old one, but it spins. You plug it in, you turn it on, it spins. You stop, you take the hose off, you put it down the drain in the floor, put it up, you fill it up again, you rinse, you do that twice. Well, that works great. The washing machine was doing fine. It was what they called a spinner that went bad. And if you can imagine in Norway, on the west coast, even in the summer, nothing dries unless the sun's out, because it's so wet. So what they have to do is have underfloor heating, even in these old bathrooms, in these old houses. But you have to have this spinner. Now, some of you belong to fancy clubs here in the U.S. You might have an indoor swimming pool or something, jacuzzi, and you have these spinner things. They're centrifuges, basically, and you can dry out your swimming suit. That's what they in Norway used to use to dry their clothes. Their washing machine didn't dry them. So you either went like this to wring out the water in your clothes, or you had this spinner. Well, Ruar's spinner stopped working. And this is a tragedy. He doesn't have a wife, he doesn't have anybody to help him. He has to do all his laundry. So Gudrun, his next door neighbor on another island, and his good friend. Now Gudrun is about 75. And she used to be kind of tall, but she's getting shorter and shorter now. And she still takes her own boat from one island to the next. And she and Ruar work together a lot, so they're very good pals. But Gudrun was able to get this spinner to replace it for Ruar. A friend in Bergen found an old one, and they sent it down on the boat to Gudrun's island. So she tries to call Ruar, but you know what's happening? He's on the telephone. It's busy. No answer. She has this new spinner, as she calls it. So she gets in her boat, she goes down to the dock, takes this big black plastic bag that's wrapping this spinner, which is about this big, this drying machine. It looks like a big garbage can, the kind you put your foot on and step on it and it opens, like that. And she puts it in her boat. Well, it's October and it's dark pretty early. But she's so excited to have this spinner for the water that she does it by herself. So she goes in her boat, takes her boat, pulls the outboard motor, starts it up, and she's going to go over and surprise her with this new spinner. She gets over to the dock, and the tide's kind of low. So she pulls her boat up to the dock, and she's kind of down here, and the dock's about up here. She ties a couple pieces of rope around the post. She picks up the spinner. She sets it up on the dock, and she's pretty strong, even though she's in her 70s. She's pretty strong. She's setting it up on the dock. As she's doing it, the boat's going farther and farther away. And all of a sudden, she and the spinner fall in the water together. And this is Norway. This is not the Bahamas. So it's quite cold. But all she can think of, and she's a good swimmer, she's rescued a calf before from the water. All she can think of is the spinner is electric, and it's in the water in this black plastic bag. As soon as it gets wet, it's gone. So she swims out to get it in the harbor. She takes it to shore. She brings it up on shore out of the water, dripping wet. She goes up to the house. She goes to the door. It's pounding on the door. Then she realizes he never locks his door. She opens the door and walks in. She's standing there dripping wet. Ruar comes out, he's on his telephone. What happened to you? He doesn't put down the telephone. He keeps talking on the telephone, and she's dripping wet. So finally, she says, just help me out of these clothes. Get me something dry. And so he puts down the phone, finally, gets her into the bathroom, brings her some dry clothes, and they rescued the spinner. They now have a spinner, so he can dry his clothes. And whose clothes do they dry first? Gudrun's.